As a kid, I remember liking to watch the show Star Search. It's kind of maybe somewhat as a precursor for some of those more reality TV shows today that all kind of have the same premise, right? You start off with this mass of people, and just to whoever feels free to, or is willing to risk lining up for these auditions, and through the process of the show, they go from a large group to a smaller group, and finally to just a few, and then that winner, who is the star, the one whom we've been looking for. It's a precursor to a lot of those reality TV shows today, like American Idol, America's Got Talent, The X Factor, The Sing-Off, So You Think You Can Dance, right? We've got a lot of these shows that all have the same idea. But all these contestants, despite their abilities, all share one dream. The dream of possibilities of what the future will bring, what could lie ahead, if they are the one who was picked and chosen. And of course, through these, we eventually get to one where one is selected and their life is changed forever. There must be something captivating about watching people rise from being normal, having normal lives with normal jobs and a normal family, to be a star, even an idol. And isn't that really what most of us want in life? To be an idol, to be the star of our own show, a name that everyone recognizes. Maybe not so much. But for those who take this risk, that's part of it. But the truth is, with every one of these idols that also comes up, there's all those people that started, that waited in line, that went through their auditions, and are lost along the way. Because in the end, there can only be one winner, which makes for a whole lot of losers. But even with such slim odds, it's unbelievable those who go out and try, who risk of themselves, who have such faith in themselves to go out and to try to do the impossible. It's sometimes a quality that I actually admire in those who begin. But I have to be honest, I don't think I could ever do it. And when I lived in Chicago, they had these casting calls every so often. They would have these auditions. And so I had my opportunities to go and stand in line and to be auditioned. And it's not that I didn't think I was good enough. Truth is, I'm not. There's no way I was making it past the first round. Well, I just call this a little bit of realism, and I'm okay with it. And while most times I'm a believer in kind of these phrases of the worst thing in life is to not try, I think this is the one time where this doesn't apply. Because the real reason why I never went out to these auditions was not that I would fail and not get picked, because there is something worse than not trying. There's making that one episode where they've taken all of the worst of the auditions so that you become an internet sensation, but not for the reason why you wanted to. I was always afraid of making that episode. Wherever, the ones where we watch with our good Christian, views and go, how on earth did they think they could ever do this? I'm pretty sure that was going to be me. And the worst thing possible was to be sitting there and judged. And I just knew that this was not the risk that I wanted to take. It's this type of television that is why I feel a little bit of sympathy for the third slave described in our story today. You remember him. He's the one that has been given a talent, and he takes it and immediately buries it in the ground because he knows what is at stake. He knows, or at least he thinks he has a pretty good idea about what was going to happen if he gambled or invested or traded these things that don't belong to him. He knows, or at least he thinks he has a pretty good idea of what's going to happen if he were to have lost it all. And that the answer that he'll get when his master returns isn't going to be, well, you tried, and boy, I'm proud of you for doing that. No, he buries his talent because he knows deep in his heart what his master is like. And so it's safer to take that talent, to bury it in the ground, to pack the dirt solidly, and tightly and wait for his master to return. And if you were to believe the description of the master from this third slave, you might be inclined to do the same. Because if your description of the master resembles Simon Cowell, I'm pretty sure that I am bearing my talent. I'd much rather do that than step in front of him. But the weird thing in this story is that the fear of this third slave isn't shared by all of those who are with him. There are those first two who are given responsibility, they're given their talents. It says that they're given to their own abilities, but that still doesn't mean there's any guarantee in what happens when they go out. There's no guarantee in life, nothing to assure their success, but they go out seemingly free of the same fear as their fellow servant. And so the big question that we should begin with in this text, the one that I think that we have to start with in order to understand everything else that is happening, is to ask who is right. Who views the master correctly? Is it the first and the second slaves, the one who set out right away to work, seemingly free of worry about the task ahead of them? Not worried about what happens when the master returns? Are they right? Or is the third fellow, the one who lets fear seize him, and that he knows that the safest possible thing is to go and to take it and to bury it in the ground because he's terrified of what's going to happen when the master returns? Which one is right? Now, in most of Jesus' parables, when you get a master or a king, that's kind of the character that God plays in the story. And the same is true here. Which means that it's kind of important for us to maybe understand what's happening here, because if Jesus is the master who has gone on a long journey, well, this almost starts to sound familiar for us. Maybe it's like the journey that Jesus goes on to his heavenly Father during the ascension, after leaving his disciples with a few instructions. It sounds a lot like the time that we are in right now as we await for our Master and our King to return, as we await for Jesus to come back once again, and that we have been entrusted with much, and the Master has left us to return at another time. And as we await for Jesus to return to judge the living and the dead, these words that we so often confess in the creeds, we're asked the same question of how do we view the Master? And since we're in this time of waiting, it might actually be important and helpful for us to be clear about whom we are waiting for to return. Because if the description of the third slave is right, this is maybe not very comforting for us. It's actually pretty terrifying to me. Now, maybe some of you might be motivated by this type of God, that God who is ready, willing, and even maybe eager to punish sinners. So you better go get your life in order and live perfectly free of sin, because if you don't, you know what's going to happen. And if I see God this way, I'm actually just a little panicked. Because how do I know which slave I am? Have I gone out and done enough good to outweigh the bad? Have I borne enough good fruit? Have I buried my talent in the ground, not trusting? If this is how we really see God, then it really doesn't bode well for those of us who refuse to try, who are afraid to go to test our talents out in the public, because apparently there is something worse than standing in front of Simon. And there are certainly those Christian traditions that have taken this approach to seeing God. Then again, as a parable, the answers that we sometimes seek are a little more complicated and nuanced. Now, in part, I think it helps to know where this parable sits in Matthew's gospel. That this is the last teaching that Jesus gives to his disciples It's the last parable, the last story before these next events unfold. Final words before he shares a last meal with his followers. Final words before he is betrayed and arrested. Before he prays in a garden. Final words before he is abandoned by those who are closest to him and led to the cross. It is in these words that don't come as parable or story, but as in what Jesus really does as he bears the title of king over his head as he is crucified and dies. That maybe we see in these actions the answer for the question in this parable of what kind of king are we waiting for? Because what we see in Jesus and what happens doesn't quite sound like what this third slave describes. It doesn't sound like the harshness. It doesn't sound like a ruler who lives to benefit off the laborers of others. It's the true king who gives his life for his people. As I read this parable, and of all of these servants that are present, there seems to be one difference that really stands out. And it's not their returns, but instead how they trust. These first two slaves, as they go out, they have been freed to go and take out what the king has given and risk it all. They trust. And ultimately, they are rewarded. Now, they're not rewarded with the bounty. They're not rewarded with a portion of these talents that they brought back, but they are rewarded in being invited into the king's joy. But this third slave who can't trust, his downfall isn't the return. After all, he could have failed more. He could have gone and lost it and returned to the king with nothing. He could have probably even made it worse and returned to the king in debt, having lost more than what was entrusted. But the story isn't about the return on investment. It's about faith and trust in the one who gives. In this way, then, we can maybe make more sense with how this story ends. As those who are given, more will be given. As those who have little, even what they have will be taken away. That joy brings joy. Hope brings hope. Trusting in God, who is always faithful to us, brings more trust in God. But to the one who is afraid, only fear and sorrow can come forth. And living in the place of outer darkness, where gnashing of teeth, this is simply what life looks like when we bury God's promise and live in fear of God's return. These last few parables we get in Matthew's Gospels, we call these judgment texts. But the judgment here isn't like it's a talent search. The judgment isn't about how well we perform or how well we do, the return on our investment that we make. It's about our trust in the King, about faith in the one whom will return. And when we place our trust in the King who bears the cross, the one who has died and who has risen again, that means this judgment ultimately isn't about us, but is about the King. That this judgment is about his love and mercy that shines through. This is a King for whom we await with joy and expectation and longing for his return, not waiting with fear and trembling because we think we know what's going to happen. It's a king who we wait for like the father waits for his prodigal child to return. Or like the shepherd who leaves the 99 to go search for the one who is lost. Or lights a lamp to search all night for her lost coin. This is the king whom we see. The one who gives his own life for his servants. That we may wait for his return with joy and hope. Trusting in the one who comes. Trusting in his promise, love, and mercy. Amen.